It's been 2 years since these dramatic images were broadcast around the world. The capture and killing of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. It marked the end of his 42-year rule and the beginning of what should be a new democratic era. But racked with violence and economic stagnation, just how stable is the new Libya? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Libya, 2 years on. In the immediate aftermath of Muammar Gaddafi's overthrow, there was jubilation on the streets and high hopes for a new democratic country. But the former rebel fighters who helped overthrow Gaddafi are now jostling among themselves for power. Libya is still without a new constitution. The country is flooded with weapons and violence is common. In the past year alone, more than 80 people, many of them high-ranking military and police figures, have been killed in eastern Libya. In the past year alone, more than 80 people, many of them high-ranking military and police figures, have been killed in eastern Libya. The latest happened just a few days ago. On Friday, the military's police commander, Ahmed al-Baghdadi, was shot as he left a mosque in Benghazi. Then there's the kidnapping earlier this month of Libya's Prime Minister Ali Zaidan. He was taken from his hotel by a group of gunmen. He was released shortly after, but Zaidan said his abduction amounted to an attempted coup. Adding to the latest tension, the arrest 2 weeks ago of an al-Qaeda suspect by US commandos who took him from outside his home in Tripoli. That has fueled outrage against the Libyan government for its alleged cooperation with Washington in that arrest. Let's bring in our guest now. In Washington, we have Larry Korb. He's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a former assistant US Secretary of Defense. El-Gomati joins us from Beirut. He is director of the Sadeq Institute, a non-governmental think tank. And on the line from Tripoli, we have Abdul Monem al-Yasser, Libya's chairman of national security. Let me go to you first, Abdul Monem al-Yasser. What is the government's response to this latest violence?
First, hello to everyone, and thank you for having this discussion about Libya. Obviously, it's of prime interest to everybody. Libya succeeds. The government is, in truth, is showed that to be not as effective as we want it to be. Not realizing that Libya's institutions are being destroyed over the last 42 years. And only talking about that now and not being able to respond to all of these issues and not tackle the primary issues, the primary tasks that needed to be tackled is a serious concern because, vis-a-vis this government.
Is the latest violence linked to the arrest of the al-Qaeda's al-Libi, or is this latest violence just part of the fight for control of the country?
It doesn't seem to be directly related. The violence is being going. I mean, it's been about 89 assassinations or so up to this point, and this has started way long time ago. And it's very typical of post-revolution, post-armed conflict. And when there's various parties that are not comfortable with this change, you can expect this kind of destabilization effort.
Let me put that to el-Gomati, excuse me, jumping in there. Is that what it is? Is this just post-armed conflict playing out?
I suppose to a certain degree, yes. I mean, if anything, the revolutions were, an act of unraveling, and they showed underneath the petri dish what's really happening. And I suppose to second that, government in itself is very much a poisoned chalice. So I suppose post-revolution violence really comes into this notion of what are we all fighting for, and I suppose this is very much part of a national conversation, albeit in very toxic terms, and voiced in very, very toxic ways. The post-revolution violence that has engulfed Libya is because that nature loves a vacuum,
and easy to fight if you've got nobody stopping you.
And easy to fight if there's nobody stopping you, unless there's another rival militia trying to stop you, and if the government is incapable of being that fair arbiter, that fair mediator in the middle, that can stop sides from clashing in very violent ways. And I suppose that is the enduring failure of both the NTC government and the cabinets that have gone afterwards, and now the General National Congress.
Larry, how is the US viewing what is happening in Libya 2 years after Muammar Gaddafi, and the bigger picture of these security concerns?
Well, it looks at it mainly in terms of, could it become a haven for another al-Qaeda related group and cause violence in both in Libya and in the region?
Isn't that what it is already?
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, the United States and its international partners who helped overthrow Gaddafi then just walked away from the situation, didn't provide any aid or didn't provide any type of troops to provide stabilization to help the government get on its feet. As we've seen, it's one thing to get rid of a regime, whether it's Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or the Taliban in Afghanistan. It's much more difficult to build a civil society, a civil functioning society. So
why do you think, excuse me, jumping in again, Larry, why do you think the US did it that way, knowing from previous experience how detrimental that is to rebuilding a country?
Basically, they don't want to pay the price. They saw the price that they paid in Iraq, still paying in Afghanistan. Basically, they don't want to, nor do the American people want to pay that price. I mean, for the American people, they're not concerned at all about Libya, let alone, you know, even Afghanistan.
And what about the arrest of al-Libi when the US forces went in and snatched him? It must make you wonder why the US decided to do it now when the country is so fragile.
Well, I think they decided to because they had the opportunity to, to do it. I mean, they've been trying to do this for quite a while, and I think the opportunity just presented itself. And this is the new way in which the United States is going to get involved: special forces and drones. We saw the same time that they got al-Libi, they went into Somalia to try and get the leader of al-Shabaab, who had perpetrated the attacks in the mall in Kenya.
Abdul Monem, it seems that there is total disregard for Libya's sovereignty.
Well, unfortunately, that's the case. The failure of the NTC and the transition government and the temporary government, current government, and GNC to realize that in a post-conflict situation, what needs to be done is to DDR, the demobilization, the disarmament, and reintegration of militias, armed militias, and security sector reform. These are primary importance. And national dialogue and reconciliation all enable the government to take back power, to actually become the only force on the ground, unless the government monopolizes force.
Okay, so how do you suggest the government does this? How do you suggest the government takes back power? How do you build a state?
I have sent several proposals. I have presented proposals to the GNC. There is a serious issue in terms of, let's call it a mental barrier around here in Libya for accepting that disarmament is something that is doable, and it's been done in different countries that went through similar experiences like Libya. But the decision makers, whether in the GNC or the government, still not realizing that, thinking that it's an impossible thing to do. And what they have done actually after the deliberation that we talked about, instead of disarming the militias that were formed during the armed struggle, they fueled the formation of new militias until it mushroomed to about 270,000 strong. All of them, these 270,000, are receiving salaries from the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of the Interior, and have the power, and basically are under no control. So everything that needs to be done it wasn't done, and what was done was the opposite. Instead of disarming, arming. Instead of demobilization, to basically mobilize them more. in a very strange and ironic way. I personally, as a chairman of National Security Committee and a member of GNC, and championed these issues in the past, and I wrote about them. I presented proposals, and I talked countless times in the media and with the GNC, within the GNC inside, but I'm still not having much luck convincing everybody that what is being done right now and what has been done.
Yeah, I suspect you have a pretty tough job at the moment. I mean, Libya's Prime Minister recently called on Western powers to help him stop the spread of what he calls militancy in his country. It's a problem the government has been unable to deal with since Gaddafi was toppled. There are more than 225,000 Libyans registered in militias. They receive state salaries but often act outside of government control, taking orders from local or political commanders. The government has repeatedly tried to integrate them into the national army. Without success, it's led to a situation where militias have been co-opted by the state into a semi-official security service. Some militias are now exploiting the power vacuum outside Tripoli and are pushing for greater regional autonomy. Groups in Libya's eastern Cyrenaica region and in the southern Fezzan have called for independence. In Cyrenaica, 33-year-old former rebel leader Ibrahim al-Jathran and his 20,000-strong militia say they now run local affairs. Jathran and his men control facilities that account for 60% of Libya's oil wealth. And last month, the group in Fezzan also declared itself independent from the state. Like their eastern counterparts, they blamed the move on the weak performance of Libya's central government. Larry, you have jihadist militias and now 2 federalist militias. Let's talk about what's happening in the east of the country. Are we looking at a potential breakup of the country here?
Well, I think you are, unless the international community takes some action. Remember, in the Balkans, after we got rid of Milosevic and bombed Kosovo for 79 days, we sent peacekeepers in. In fact, there are still some peacekeepers in that country. You can't just get rid of a regime and walk away and hope for the best, because everybody was united to get rid of Gaddafi. But then, as you pointed out, they all have different versions or visions of how to run the run the country. And it's really up to the international community. I don't think the Libyans can solve it by themselves without some outside assistance.
And it's those militia forces who are holding an estimated 60% of the country's oil reserves are effectively holding the government to ransom.
Well, I suppose that's nothing new, though. I suppose 6 months ago, the entire international presence in Benghazi, bar two agencies were effectively pushed out and forced out of the country. And I suppose for it now to be on the alarm bells now because of the federalist movement, I think is something that we should have known around 6-7 months ago, or even a year ago. But the question really about Benghazi is, or rather even Cyrenaica and the Eastern Bloc and even Fezzan, is whether or not there is a substantial or even a real, tangible economic vision that they've outlaid for a way in which this country could be separated or partitioned. And I suppose until then, I suppose it's very, very much trying, and I suppose even many of the federalist militias in Benghazi that have taken orders and know that money comes from the central government are saying, well, we want more justice and we want more money and we want more autonomy in our area. But I suppose the deeper lying issues are the very same issues that Muammar Gaddafi was contending with, and Ben Ali and Mubarak for that same matter, was this sincere amount of socio-economic failure that had occurred across the board, really, in Libya, and that's failures in transportation, in education, in unemployment.
I mean, it's a dire situation. Sorry, I mean, I'm hearing about rubbish piled up on streets, that the electricity outages for like 16 hours.
Yeah, I mean, these are the very same issues that have led many people that are unemployed, figures north of 30–40% in the youth demographic, to go and hold Kalashnikovs. And today in Libya, as it was in the last 2 years, a Kalashnikov is an insurance policy. It means that I will get a salary. It means that I have some weight in society. It means that whether I'm an unemployed graduate or whether I'm a guy that was just not working and looking for work, that if I have a Kalashnikov, I have a say in the way in which my country can function. And as we've found out in the last few months, I can even kidnap a prime minister. So I suppose today those very same issues that have been around for 2 years have come to the detriment of the international community. I suppose even what you've been asking about the US presence in Libya, it's gone back and fallen back on a very old framework for the Middle East. It's nothing to do with the Arab Spring. It's nothing to do with revolutions and moves towards democratic transitions. It's very much a security-orientated lens that they've adopted on Libya, and one that has undermined sovereignty in the past week. I would suppose that the fallout since the capture of al-Libi will be more assassinations, will be more kidnappings, because if it looks like you're not even in control of your own border and you're not even in control of your own diplomatic presence in your country, then you're open game. You know, you're fair game for every militia in that country, and I suppose it's something of an alarm bell that we have to start ringing right now. You know,
Abdul Monem, how are you going to retake this? How is the government going to reclaim power there, and how is the government going to address concerns of those who are holding on to the oil, who want to break away from you?
Well, frankly, I think this government is really came to the point of clearly not capable. So there has to be some regain of confidence on behalf of many in Libya into their government. This government.
How are you going to do that?
The Congress is in discussion. Many the political activists and social activists are in discussions about the replacement of this government. And there has to be a roadmap. There's several discussions of roadmap about the GNC itself and its fate and how Libya is going to transition really to a stable country. I have presented a roadmap that includes the removal of this government and appointing of a special, strong crisis management government that focuses on these primary tasks that we talked about: disarmament and the reintegration of militia members and the national dialogue and reconciliation. These are all important issues that need to be focused on right now. And there has to be disarmament.
Okay, Larry, I mean, do you think that's the way to go? Do you think the government needs to step down? Because a democratic process and elections are pretty irrelevant, I should imagine, when guns rule.
I think what you need, I mean, if you can't get a peacekeeping force in there, I think what you need is to have an international mediator, somebody like Brahimi, who has, dealt with a lot of these crises in there, to go in and get the factions together to come up with an interim government. And, basically this government obviously is not very effective. I mean, if you can take the prime minister and hold him, hostage, just walk in and get him, that he really doesn't have the power to run the country. But that's what you need. It seems to me like an interim government while you go and see if you can and resolve these questions. And it's clear to me it can't be done by the Libyans themselves. It's got to be some outside help. And it would be good to go to the UN and get Ban Ki-moon to appoint someone to go in and see if they can help the situation.
Anas, you're nodding your head?
Well, I suppose I'm not sure whether or not allowing the country to become exposed to more international forces on the ground will do any better. And I suppose the international community doesn't have a long repertoire of success with having international peacekeeping forces. I suppose even today, the notion that the Taliban have completely left is a myth. And in fact, any exit from Afghanistan will have to be a negotiated exit with the Taliban. So I suppose it's very, very difficult trying to overpopulate the ground with more troops. I think
so
today,
is the key rather in the troops who are already there, the militia forces?
Well, the key is to reform the idea of what disarmament and demobilization and reintegration means. We're not reintegrating them into any entity. They were never part of the armed forces beforehand. They were just a lot of them were just normal civilians that have taken arms. And so I suppose even then this questions the very fact of all the academic and scholarly and expert knowledge that is coming into Libya of how they want to work this in. The numbers have mushroomed because of some, of a very deeper underlying cause. If we treat the symptom being just the arms, then we're not really understanding the deeper lying under cause. The cause, obviously, has been the way in which the country has been has economically marginalized many of its citizens across the borders. We're not talking about the borders here. Libya has one of the most porous borders in the entire world. And we're not only susceptible to Libyan armed militias, but we're susceptible to Algerian, Sudanese, Chadian and Nigerian militias that have come back. The Malian government fell in last year because of what happened and because of the fallout of the Libyan, of the Libyan revolution. I suppose that today is the biggest alarm bell that could be possibly rung in 2013. that the entire sovereignty, or even what we declare to be the borders of Libya, no longer exist, if they ever existed in the first place. This is definitely an international mission, but it has to be rethought into the way in which we can integrate militias or integrate people that have had no experience in the armed forces, that have no health, that have health concerns, and whether they could even serve in an army or in a police force. The biggest concern that I have when looking at 270,000 plus members of what we deem militias is, if some of these people go abroad, if some of them stay in Libya, how do you want to try and find them jobs? There's no way of trying to say to them, get rid of your weapons. What are the jobs? There's a job market in Libya that, like I said, has 30 to 40% or north of that figure in unemployment. What are you doing in the economy?
It's a rich country, but sadly bankrupt right now. I mean, there's little doubt the country faces a lot of challenges. We've covered just some of them. But let's take a moment now to listen to what some Libyans have to say about the 2-year anniversary of the fall of Muammar Gaddafi.
If you take the roadmap set by the National Transitional Council before the liberation, you could say that we're on track so far.
It's impossible for us to rebuild the country because we have no formal army or police. We have wasted 2 years doing nothing. I can understand why car thefts, robberies and kidnapping still haunt our daily lives.
I'm very dissatisfied with the government, and I consider them to be a total failure, and all the political groups are only concerned about their own interests.
Abdul Monem, have you let Libyans down, the people who put their trust in you? Have you let them down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I worked very closely with the Prime Minister at the beginning of his term. I thought he was going to listen to our recommendations, starting from the draft of his budget. Unfortunately, it was wrong from the beginning. He did not really understand the primary issues and still doesn't. So, we're talking about taking from what Alan was talking about. We have actually close to about 350,000 or 400,000 unemployed people. Those unemployed, right now, they are in part of these militias and so on. But we have to have a government that has specific programs to start the economy, at the same time to allocate people to different areas. For instance, I have a proposal for sending 41,000 of those young kids to study abroad for a year and a half of vocational training and English language training and upgrading in their fields. Another 30,000 is to be absorbed into the army, and another 35,000 into the police force. That's 100,000. And starting some large-scale programs, large-scale joint venture investment in large projects that can absorb and create lots of jobs. These things have to be started now. But the government also has to implement local government as well. We have to have autonomous governments to make sure people that solve their problems, their local problems, because this government has spent billions of dollars and hasn't shown anything in the ground.
Larry, it's hard to imagine that not so long ago Libya was hailed as a success story. Now people are talking about a failed state and civil war.
Well, there's no doubt about it. As I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to have regime change. There's another thing to build a state. And unfortunately, given what's happened to the United States, as I mentioned in other countries, I don't see the United States taking the lead. You look at Mali, if the French hadn't stepped in, I don't know where we would be there. You look to the extent that the United States is focused on that region, it's all about Syria now, and hopefully, to get another Geneva conference. So somebody needs to step up. It's easy for me to say that they have to, but I think really this is something that the UN, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, has to take on. And if he watches this program and recognizes how bad things are, maybe he will take some steps. But the United States basically, they said, to use a terrible word, mission accomplished when Gaddafi went.
Well, thank you very much to my guests, Larry Korb with those final words, Anas el-Gomati and Abdul Monem al-Yasser. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want, you can send us your feedback. Just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Jane Dutton. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.